In this video we look for a group of very tall scarce birds, we look for rare birds, we have disappointment and success, we look for Britain's fastest declining bird, and we attract a lot of cows. Welcome back folks, and we start this video where the previous one ended. We left Norfolk and headed back into Lincolnshire, where we parked up for the night near Deeping Lakes. This is a lovely little reserve that we've only ever visited once, but today, unfortunately, we did have somewhere to be, so couldn't stick round very long. We had a short walk, had a peer through a screen at some wildfowl, and then headed out on the road towards Willow Tree Fen. We thought we'd get there early, hoping to spot some birds leaving roost. When we arrived though, it was closed. Hey folks, we are at Willow Tree Fen. We've turned up thinking it was a good time to come early on, and it's not open. So only it's open at 9, so it's going to be a waiting game. We're just going to have a peer around, see what's here. We'd come to Willow Tree Fen to hopefully see cranes. This species, although being reasonably rare, we have seen this year, only in 1s and 2s. Willow Tree Fen recently has boasted over 30 cranes at one time. This was something we had to see. The only problem is we had about half an hour before we could enter the viewing area. And unfortunately, there were no signs of cranes yet. But this didn't last for long. Kaylee, who was still sat in the van, shouted from the passenger window, "There's cranes!" as a few large birds flew in from a distance. There were about half a dozen. They circled round and eventually landed behind some tall vegetation. This was pretty exciting and already was the best view of cranes we've ever had. But then more arrived, and this time there were dozens. These birds again circled round and landed behind the same vegetation as the previous birds. Unfortunately, they landed out of sight, but we could still hear their haunting calls. It was about this time the warden came to open the gates. As soon as we parked and got out the van, we seemed to get a lot of attention from the cows that were in the field. All of them ran towards us. We weren't worried as there was a fence separating the cows and ourselves. More and more cows arrived, some with calves. All of them stood in front of where us and our van was, mooing really loudly. This is when the warden came to tell us that the farmer that feeds them has a white van identical to ours. Unfortunately, this time the cows weren't being fed, and eventually, disgruntled, began to disperse. While the cow debacle was unfolding, more cranes arrived, this time in generally small numbers. And much to our excitement, some of the cranes on the ground came out into the open so we could see them. There were 3 birds that came relatively close. The warden told us, quite proudly, that these 3 birds were very special, as the 2 adult birds had bred here this year, and the 3rd bird was their young. We continued to watch them as these 3 birds fed out in the open, and all the other birds seemed to feed behind some high vegetation, giving us some views in the distance. It must have only been about half an hour that passed before the birds started to disperse and fly away. It began with 2 birds, and then a large group, and then the remaining birds. The warden counted 32 here today, which, although wasn't as high as his highest count of 36, was a lot of cranes to see in one place in the UK, and we felt extremely privileged to have seen this.
Hi.
Hello. That was worth it, definitely. Just before the guy came to open up the gates, Katie shouted, "Oh, there's some cranes," and a handful, about half a dozen or so, flew in. Followed a few minutes later by like dozens. So it was amazing.
30 odd.
Yeah, there was 32 here, one of the warden here counted, which is crazy. So they were here, and then we watched them. Some of them came out. There was the original pair that breeds here that came out, and then after that they all flew off.
So we're here just in time.
So that was timed perfectly. We now had a long drive of over 3 hours to the outskirts of Manchester, and a place I visited as a child. It was Sale Water Park. When we arrived, we struggled to find parking, but we finally did, and tried to find our way to the bird feeders. One of our subscribers, who we mentioned in the last video too, the Peaky Birder, had given us heads up on where to find a bird we failed a couple of times this year, the very elusive willow tit. We started walking around the lake itself, spotting a few wildfowl on the way, including this lovely Muscovy duck. Unfortunately, we can't count this because this is definitely an escape. Whilst Kaylee nipped to the bathroom, I found some friends.
Oh look, I've made some friends.
And as much as I enjoyed the socialising, we had to find our target species, which wasn't as easy as I'd hoped.
Hey folks, we're at Sale Water Park and we don't know where we're going.
Even though somebody said, oh no, I do.
Well, I came here as a kid, but now I've got here, I've got absolutely no memory of it. So anyway, we're just heading around the lake here, hoping to find something that looks like a bird feeder. Apparently there's a bird hide this way, so potentially it might be there. See what we can find.
After walking in the wrong direction for a while, we bumped into a couple of nice ladies who pointed us in the right direction, and after a bit of a walk, we found the bird feeders that are sometimes frequented by willow tits. We sat on a bench overlooking the feeders in anticipation, hoping that we'd get a sight of Britain's fastest declining species of bird. This species has declined by 94% since the 1970s, so not an easy bird to find anymore, unless you know where you're looking, and we'd been told this is a pretty reliable spot. So we got comfortable and waited. This bird feeder was really busy, especially considering there was a lot of foot traffic going past it, including dogs and children on bikes. Regardless, there were plenty of birds coming back and to, like nuthatch, great tits, coal tits and blue tits. This in itself was wonderful to watch, but we were here for the willow tits, and eventually one briefly showed up. As soon as it arrived, it grabbed a bit of food and flew off. We did wait around a bit, hoping that it might return, and it did for a little bit, giving us great views. What a cool bird.
Kaylee's got a nice lolly. We're at Sale Water Park. After getting lost, we managed to get ourselves unlost and found the bird feeders with help from another couple of people who were looking at birds, so that was great. And we found our willow tit, finally.
Let's hope the population of this beautiful bird stabilises. Unfortunately, now it was time to go home. A few days before this weekend adventure, I'd taken a trip about an hour away from where we live to Aled Isaf, a little reservoir in North Wales, where on previous days an American golden plover had been sighted. Apparently it had been hanging around with a flock of European golden plovers. When I arrived, it was gloomy and quite windy, and there were no plovers anywhere. But this didn't last for long. A flock came in from off the moors and landed on the opposite side of this narrow piece of water. Now I had the task of scanning through these birds, hoping they don't all move, trying to find one that looked a little different. And although at this point there were no other birders there, I was in good company. This wheatear almost sat right next to me. I continued battling through the wind, trying to scan through the plovers on the opposite side of the water, not currently seeing anything that looked out of place enough. I walked down the path past some sheep to try and get a different view, and again nothing. It was about this time one of the local birders, Alex, showed up. This guy's pretty good, so hopefully he'll pick out the American visitor. But after a while of scanning, even he couldn't find it. There were a number of birds to scan through, with quite a lot of variation in plumage, more than I previously realised. And even with a couple more birders here and more eyes on the job, we still couldn't find the American golden plover. Although a little disappointed, it wasn't a wasted journey, as we got a great view of this wonderful male hen harrier as it flew past at a distance, and only the third male hen harrier I've ever seen. Although not finding the American golden plover on this occasion, I did return again a few days later. This time just as windy as the previous time and also a bit rainy, so I stayed in the car. Luckily for me, birding out of the car window, the golden plovers were on the near side of the reservoir, giving me much closer views. Hopefully this would make my job easier. It didn't. Again, I was struck by the profound variations in plumage in this species, but nothing, again, looked different enough to be an American golden plover, and eventually, unfortunately, I had to give up on this bird. A few days later, both myself and Kaylee had spotted a report on our Bird Guides app. There had been a purple heron sighted about 45 minutes away from where we live. Luckily, the following day I had a day off, so after the school run we jumped in the car and headed to Shropshire. After bumping into another birder in the car park who told us that the purple heron hadn't been seen that morning, we headed out into the reserve regardless. Hey folks, we're in Shropshire today at Wood Lane Nature Reserve, hoping to find a purple heron that was reported here yesterday. It was here in the morning and then sighted again late afternoon. So we're here in the middle of the day, so I don't know how much chance we've got, but we're going to go and have a look. Stick with us, let's see what we find. We wandered past one of the fishing lakes to a hide that looked over a large pool, and although there were some birds present here, it was quite quiet. We could hear a few coots in the distance, but the only birds in sight were Canada geese. There was a couple of cormorants drying off on a spit. We did find one heron, but this was a grey heron that was hunting in some grass next to the pool. At this point, I wasn't feeling very confident. We headed back on the path towards another hide. This is a lovely little reserve, and although it's looked after by the Wildlife Trust, the hides here are locked and require a key code, which can be received from applying for a permit. After wandering past some pretty interesting looking mushrooms, we arrived at the hide, which overlooked the same piece of water the previous hide looked over, but from a different angle. This is where the previous day the purple heron had been sighted. It had been seen in the morning, then it flew off, and it showed up again late in the afternoon. To one side of this hide there were some bird feeders that were being frequented by all sorts of small birds like blue tits, great tits and chaffinches, and under the feeders moorhens were taking advantage of all the bits that the smaller birds were dropping. As there was no sight of the purple heron, we got chatting to the other two birders in the hide, when out of the marshes almost directly in front of us, a bird took off and flew across the water. It was our purple heron. I wasn't quick enough to get the camera on it close, you can see it on this video in the distance, but I did catch this little bit of footage as it was about to land behind this reed bed. We all sat there eagerly hoping that the bird would fly back. We did get a brief view as it flew along the back of the reed bed. Thinking that this may be the last we'd see of it, the grey heron we'd seen previously took a dislike to the purple heron and chased it off, giving us great views as the young purple heron flew across directly in front of the hide. This species, although I've seen it abroad, we've never seen it in the UK, so this is a first for us here.
We got it!
We got it. We definitely got it. I wasn't that confident, but Kaylee was more confident than me, and it paid off. We found some other birders and we sat in a hide, and we were just chatting, and then it kind of flew from really close to us. It was in some reeds, like quite close to us. We had no idea.
One side to the other.
And it went from one side to the other quite quickly. It struggled to get some footage of it initially. Got a little bit of it landing, and then it flew back across, being chased by a grey heron. And then we lost it. So, but excellent. There's another bird for the year list. Stunning.
And although our target's pretty high now, we're still finding the odd bird to add.
And that's the end of our video. Shame. We'll be back soon though. We've had a great time. Thanks so much for watching. Please like,
please subscribe,
and please press the notification bell.
Bye.
See you on the next adventure.